That evening, I thought I knew how my day would end. A quiet dinner, a little television, maybe some tea before bed. But when my son walked through the door and sat down across from me, the words he spoke turned everything upside down. I wasn't ready for what he said, and it left me completely speechless. Before I tell you what happened, let me know in the comments from which city you're watching us tonight. It's always so heartwarming to see how far these stories travel across the world. Now, let me take you back to that moment. The house smelled faintly of roasted chicken and herbs. I had been cooking earlier, trying to keep myself busy the way I often did. There's something about the rhythm of chopping vegetables and stirring a pot that keeps my mind steady. The late afternoon light streamed through the curtains, casting long golden lines across the kitchen table. It was peaceful, the kind of ordinary peace I had come to expect after years of living alone since my husband passed away. I wasn't expecting my son Daniel to visit that evening. He usually called ahead, and when he didn't, it was either because he was busy or something was on his mind. I knew my boy well enough to sense the difference. So when I heard his car in the driveway and then the front door open, my heart jumped in that half-worry, half-joy way only mothers know. "Mom," he called out, his voice deeper than I remembered from just a few weeks before. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and stepped into the living room. There he stood, tall and strong, but with something unreadable in his eyes. He hugged me tightly, almost as though he needed to gather strength from me before he could speak. We sat at the table, the two of us facing each other with the comfort of family, but also the weight of something unspoken between us. His fingers drummed lightly on the wooden surface, a habit he'd had since childhood when he was nervous. That was when I knew, whatever he had come to tell me, it wasn't simple. "I have news," he said finally. His tone was steady, but I could hear the tremor hiding underneath. "I don't know how to start, but I need you to listen." The way he looked at me, eyes earnest, searching, almost pleading, made me put down the glass of water I'd been holding. My heart quickened, though I tried to remain calm, giving him the safe silence he needed to find his words. "Go on," I said softly. "Whatever it is, I'm listening." He took a breath, and for a moment the only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. I could see the boy he once was, sitting at the table after school, telling me about playground fights or forgotten homework. But this wasn't the same. This was heavier. Before he spoke again, his eyes glistened with something close to tears. He rarely cried, and I hadn't seen that look since he was a teenager. My instinct was to reach out, but I held back. I wanted him to be the one to take that step. "Mom, my life is about to change," he said slowly. "And yours might too, whether you're ready or not." I felt the air tighten around us, as though the walls of the house were leaning in to listen. My thoughts raced. Was he moving away? Did he lose his job? Was he sick? The unknown wrapped around me like a cold wind. But instead of rushing him, I nodded, keeping my voice even. "Tell me what it is, Daniel. You don't have to carry it alone." That seemed to give him courage. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together, knuckles pale. And then he said it. Words that I never expected, words that knocked the air right out of me. In that instant, my world shifted. The room was the same ticking clock, the same dim light, the same faint smell of herbs lingering in the air. But nothing felt familiar anymore. My son had handed me a truth I wasn't prepared for, and all I could do was sit there, staring at him, my heart aching with both fear and love. I wanted to respond, to offer something. Anything that would make the moment easier for him. But for the first time in my life as his mother, I had no words. I was utterly speechless. He didn't make me wait. The words came out in a single breath, as if he'd been holding them underwater. I'm a father. The room didn't move, but the floor felt suddenly softer under my feet, like the old planks had turned to damp earth after rain. My first instinct was to ask questions, 1,000 of them, but Daniel's eyes were glistening and very young, and I knew if I rushed him I might miss what mattered. Her name is Lily, he said. She's almost 3. I heard the small catch on the word almost, the way a person marks time when they haven't yet had the chance to make the memories that fill it. He swallowed and added, she's asleep in the car. That last sentence, the ordinary fact of it, broke something open inside me. The distance between news and life evaporated. This wasn't a revelation on a phone call from miles away. There was a child outside in the driveway, a tiny person breathing softly under a dome light, surrounded by old gum wrappers and a worn sweater. I stood up, then sat down again, as if my body wasn't taking clear orders. He kept talking, halting at first, then steadier. The mother and he had ended things a year ago. It had been complicated, he said, not unkind, just a life that moved in different directions. She'd left town recently to get stability with an aunt, and then a few weeks ago there was a situation, a series of things that weren't any one person's fault, but together they were a storm. Papers were signed, calls were made, and suddenly the future had a small hand that needed holding. I told them I could do it, he said, and then his voice turned quiet. I want to do it. I need to. But I can't do it alone. It is a strange thing to feel two opposite emotions at once and believe both completely. One part of me panicked, lists and logistics flashing like headlights. Daycare, doctor's visits, shoes that fit, nap schedules, the way toddlers turn chairs into ladders, and everything into a hazard. The other part of me, the deep, steady part that remembers his first fever and his first day of school and the time he broke his arm falling off the fence, filled with a warm certainty like sunlight through old glass. We would make room. We would figure it out. We would learn her night noises the way you learn the creaks in a house. I reached my hand across the table. He let out a breath I didn't know he'd been holding and placed his hand in mine, the same hand that once wore a Band-Aid with cartoon rockets, because I'd read somewhere that courage needs costumes. Bring her in, I said. My voice didn't sound like a question or a command. It sounded like home. While he went to the car, I moved through the house on instinct, clearing a path like a tide pulling back. The spare room had been more memory box than bedroom. Extra quilts folded too neatly, the kind of pillows you buy for guests but never use. I swept an arm across the dresser to make space for small things. In the bathroom, I lined up the brightly colored towels I kept for summer visitors and found a gentle soap I used for washing sweaters. You can repropose care when you need to. The front door opened with a soft click, and there she was, sleep of the very young, heavy, and complete, her head tipped on his shoulder. A small shoe hung by its heel from a socked foot, as if it had given up halfway through a busy day. She had a little ponytail crooked to one side and a face like morning before the sun chooses how bright to be. My heart reacted in some old language, a wordless yes that settled over all my doubts. Daniel looked at me across the entryway, and I saw a second person in him. The boy he had been and the man who would now be watched by small eyes that reflected him back. He mouthed thank you without sound. I stepped closer and touched Lily's back with just the tips of 2 fingers, the way you touch a new loaf to see if the crust has settled. She stirred, made a tiny sound, more sigh than word, and then tucked her cheek deeper into his shoulder. I took the shoe and set it on the console table, next to the bowl where I keep my keys. That image, my practical habit sitting beside her tiny life, felt like a blueprint. We didn't need to make perfection tonight. We needed to make room. I led them to the spare room, turned down the quilt, fluffed a pillow, then remembered toddlers don't sleep in regular beds without the risk of sliding off like a seal from a rock. We assembled a nest on the floor with folded blankets and a spare camping pad. He lowered her gently, the way one learns to lower a hope you want to keep intact, and she slept on without complaint. Back in the kitchen, I warmed milk on the stove, the way my mother did for me when the world felt too large. Daniel sat at the table with both hands wrapped around a mug even before I poured, as if he were rehearsing the comfort. He talked in fragments at first. How he found out. The questions he asked himself in the mirror. The meeting with a social worker whose pen clicked in a rhythm that made him nervous. The way Lily had reached for his face without hesitation when he got her buckled in the car seat. I could hear the tenderness even in his guilt. "Do you think I can do this?" he asked finally, eyes not lifting from the steam. I remembered him at 8, insisting on tying his shoes alone, tangled loops and stubborn jaw. "You already are," I said. "We will get better at it together." We walked the house with quiet feet, seeing it anew through toddler logic. The coffee table with its sharp corners moved against the wall. The old ceramic vase my sister gave me went up on the top shelf. I tied a rubber band around the cabinet doors for tonight, added a list to my mind to buy proper locks tomorrow. In the living room, I took down a picture of his father, not to hide him, but to make space for Lily's photo when we had one. Grief and joy share a hallway. I felt them pass each other as we worked. Later, when the house settled and Lily's breathing took on that rhythmic depth of safe sleep, we sat on the couch and spoke in the kind of honest sentences people use when they've run out of ways to impress each other. He told me he was scared of repeating mistakes, of not being enough, of the days that come one after another with no applause. I told him about the nights I stood in the doorway when he was a baby, believing I would break under the weight of loving someone that much. The truth is, parenting never really ends. It just changes rooms. He smiled at that, a tired, grateful curve of the mouth. "Mom," he said, "I didn't want to bring chaos to your life. I'm sorry to drop this on you without warning." I shook my head. This isn't chaos. It's a beginning that arrived without an invitation. Beginnings rarely knock. We checked on Lily one more time. She had turned onto her side and drawn her knees up, one fist under her cheek like a secret. I felt a tug in my chest, gentle and firm, as if the future had hooked me carefully and was reeling me forward. I thought of the little routines we'd have to build. A cup that's always in the same cupboard, shoes by the back door, a lullaby that doesn't mind being sung off-key. I thought of the garden out back and how we could plant strawberries in the spring, small red surprises hiding under green. In the doorway, Daniel touched my arm. "Thank you for not asking me why sooner," he said. "I will," I replied. "I'll ask everything we need to ask. Just not tonight." Tonight, we learned the sound of having another heartbeat in the house. We turned off the lights and let the dark be soft. In bed, I listened to the old timbers speak to each other, the way they do when the night cools. Somewhere down the hall, a child dreamed, and a man slept like someone who had set down a heavy box. I stared at the ceiling and felt the shape of my life rearranging itself with a quiet patience. The questions would come, and so would the answers. We would make introductions to the neighbors and to the rhythm of mornings. We would likely cry in the cereal aisle once or twice. We would become 3. Just before sleep took me, I remembered Daniel at 3, chasing bubbles across the lawn, the soap catching the late sun and breaking into brief rainbows that surprised us both each time. "You can't keep a bubble," I had told him when he wanted to save one in a jar. "You just learn how to make more." In the dark, I smiled at that old lesson. Tomorrow, we would start learning how to make more of whatever this new life required. Patience, schedules, laughter we hadn't needed in a while. For now, the house held us. For now, the night was simple. For now, being speechless didn't mean being lost. It meant we were standing in the doorway of something tender, waiting for morning to show us where to step. The next morning began in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I woke not to silence, but to the sound of tiny footsteps, the kind that patter like soft rain on wood. I sat up quickly, heart racing, and there she was, Lily, standing in the doorway of my bedroom in her wrinkled little pajamas, holding a stuffed rabbit by its ear. She didn't speak right away. She just looked at me with those wide, curious eyes that seemed to ask if I was part of her world now. I smiled, though my voice trembled when I said, "Good morning, sweetheart." She didn't answer, but she padded closer, climbing onto the edge of the bed with the certainty of someone who assumes she's welcome. In that instant, I realized how quickly children test the walls of a place, checking if it can hold them. I wrapped my arm gently around her, breathing in that faint smell of sleep and shampoo, and felt something shift inside me again. Daniel appeared in the hallway, his hair sticking up in every direction, looking both proud and nervous. "She woke up asking for breakfast," he said, scratching the back of his neck. And I don't really know what to make besides cereal. So I did what mothers do best. I went to the kitchen and made a morning out of nothing. Scrambled eggs, toast with a bit of jam, warm milk poured into a cup far too big for her little hands. She sat at the table swinging her legs, watching every move I made. She barely spoke, but when I placed the plate in front of her, she gave me a small, shy smile. The kind of smile that carried more weight than words. Breakfast turned into a quiet rhythm. Daniel sat across from her, still half asleep, but every now and then his eyes softened as he watched her smear jam across her cheek instead of the bread. I noticed the way he leaned in to gently wipe her face, awkward but careful, trying his best. And I noticed the way she leaned toward him without hesitation, as if trust came naturally. The rest of the morning was ordinary in the most extraordinary way. I found an old basket in the closet and filled it with crayons, paper, and a couple of puzzles I'd kept for visiting children over the years. Lily sat on the living room rug coloring, while Daniel and I rearranged furniture, moving breakables out of reach, setting cushions along sharp corners. There was laughter, real laughter, when we both tried to assemble a forgotten child's chair and ended up with the legs pointing in different directions. For a moment, life felt startlingly normal. There wasn't a grand revelation, no heavy silence like the night before. Just a boy who had become a man, a little girl discovering a new home, and me, rediscovering a version of myself I thought was gone. In the afternoon, Lily dozed on the couch with her rabbit tucked under her chin. Daniel and I sat quietly nearby, the weight of the night's revelation still lingering, but softened now by the sight of her steady breathing. "It doesn't feel real yet," he whispered. I nodded. "It will. Give it time." The house was no longer just mine, and strangely that didn't feel like a loss. It felt like the beginning of something we hadn't expected, but maybe something we all needed. That evening, after a day that felt both long and fleeting, the house had a new kind of quiet. Not the emptiness I had grown used to, but a softer quiet, the kind that settles after a child has gone to bed and the grown-ups finally sit down to catch their breath. Lily had fallen asleep in the little nest we had made for her, clutching her rabbit the same way Daniel used to hold his old blanket. Watching her drift off was like watching time fold in on itself, 2 generations overlapping in the simplest of gestures. Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table again, the same place where the news had landed like thunder only the night before. But now, instead of tension, the air carried the scent of chamomile tea and the calm of shared understanding. He leaned back in his chair, eyes tired but steady, and said, "Mom, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't taken this the way you did." I looked at him, my son who had once seemed too young for everything, now sitting across from me carrying the weight of an entire life on his shoulders. "Daniel," I told him, "you're not alone in this. You never will be. We'll figure it out, step by step." He nodded, but I could see in his face that he still wrestled with doubt. I reached across the table, laying my hand over his. "You were my beginning once, and now she's yours. That's how family works. It keeps giving us new chances, even when we're not ready." For a long while we didn't speak. We simply listened to the steady rhythm of the clock and the occasional creak of the house adjusting to the night. Somewhere down the hall, Lily let out a small sigh in her sleep. That tiny sound seemed to weave the three of us together more tightly than any conversation could. Later, when Daniel had gone to bed, I lingered by the doorway of the spare room. I stood watching Lily breathe, her small chest rising and falling with the certainty of someone who trusts the world will hold her. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me, gratitude for the unexpected, for the way love shows up even when we aren't prepared, for the second chances we don't realize we need until they're right in front of us. As I turned out the light, I thought about how my life had changed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday, I was a woman who lived in a quiet house with memories pressed into every corner. Tonight, I was a grandmother, even if no one had yet said the word out loud. Tomorrow, I would be learning songs again, packing small lunches, and finding joy in sticky fingers and endless questions. I knew challenges were waiting. There would be long nights, worries, and moments when patience wore thin. But standing there, I understood something simple and profound. Love doesn't ask if you're ready. It arrives, sometimes uninvited, and makes a home where it's needed. I closed the door gently and whispered to myself, "We'll be just fine." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it.